Hello, viewers and subscribers. Welcome once again the screencast about the different deployment process, meaning DevOps practices like how can you continuous integration and continuous deployment process can be done by the different approach like how can you deploy the applications uh, application into the standalone jar-based deployments if you don't use the Docker and Docker Compose. And also if someone who is using the Docker and Docker Compose based deployments, and then how can you do it? How can you configure the deployment process externally, and also uh, and then externally meaning you build you standalone jar files and then you build out of the jar file, you build a Docker and Docker image, and then run the Docker image into Docker container with the Docker Compose tools, the help of the Docker tools to Docker Compose. Why we use to use Docker Compose tools? Because of the we have a lot of services need to be defined to run the application, and that's the reason Docker Compose tools help. That means for our case we will build some REST APIs, and then we try to based on the backend server, based on the PostgreSQL server. That's why we define our service, the Spring Boot application itself, and then service the definition of the Postgres database. How can take the Docker image from the Postgres from Docker Hub and run the application in the behind the scene with the Spring Boot application. That's why you can compose the Docker Compose file really help us. So, and those who are the interested, the companies that you are working, and then to use the Docker and Kubernetes. Everybody knows that Kubernetes is in the orchestration tools for the container, and Docker container orchestration tools is the most popular and open source container tools. And it's a lot of companies are looking for the DevOps engineers to have experience about the Docker and the Kubernetes based deployments and continuous integration and continuous integration and continuous deployment process. And that's why it is important. I try to share with you how can you do such a job like a different approach. How can you build use standalone jar and out of your application in Java application, Spring Boot application, okay, in the Spring Boot application for REST API implementation, and those and out of this standalone jar file, how can you compile, how can you configure, how can you set the Docker and Docker Compose files and run the application into Docker container, and those are you interested to deploy the application in the Kubernetes cluster, then I have those configurations to deploy the application into Docker and Kubernetes. So we will start the one by one to build applications with the standalone jar file based deployment. Then we can go to the Docker Compose based deployment. Then after the finally we will go to the Docker and Kubernetes based deployment. So if you saw the project structure that I already implemented, so we see that really very simple project structure, and then we have some project structure, and we have in this case we are using the database migration tools like the Flyway. Those are new into in my channels. I have already detailed database migration approach with the Flyway and Liquibase, and so on and so forth. So just follow the previous screencast, you get the understanding, the possibility. How can you integrate the Flyway, and then also how can you integrate the Liquibase for the data migration tools? Well, we have it like if you saw the pictures like that, we have it all the configuration, the Liquibase Flyway configurations, and we already created some jar files, and then out of the jar file we try to deploy If we go to this application, the Flyway based configurations, we already have it, the Flyway configurations, and it has database migration scripts, and then also it has all the definitions, how can you deploy the application out of the jar creation, how can you compose, how can you create the Docker files and Docker compose files to run the application with the Postgres database. We will go to step by step the deployment process only, but in the development process and Liquibase process and the data migration process, I have a different screencast. Just follow the channels and take the detail from from this information from this previous screencast. But today is only the how can you create the jar files? This is the idea, and how can you configure your application to deploy the standalone jar-based and Docker Compose-based and also Docker-Kubernetes-based deployment. So that means it is a deployment screencast. So completely how if you create the application, you tested it, you check it, everything properly working, and then you deploy the application into the different environment, development, QA or test department, productions, and those you need to be configured. What they need to be write down your script, and that's the things. It is really important to as a professional developer, as a many experienced developer, they need to learn how can you deploy the application, and even though it is really important, lot of developer I know they have only they have no how can you deploy the how can you implement the features and functionality, how can you do the development, but they don't know how the installation team or deployment team how it is works. That's the main reason why I try to give it to you the more focused the deployment process. How can you deploy and how can you configure with all the possibility, meaning the three possibility, standard jar-based deployments, Docker Compose-based deployments, and the Docker Kubernetes-based deployments. So we see that there is a configuration of the Docker Compose base with the database migration, the Flyway, and there is another project that I will continue the Liquibase based deployment process, database migrations using my Liquibase here, this case, and then with the Kubernetes configuration, all the configuration. That's how I shall show you detailed information, and we have seen the database migration with the Liquibase and how it is configured, and I already discussed in the previous screencast. That's the things. So let's go back to the presentation. So presentation that I said already. So we deploy the application with the three possibilities, and also the test application with the Swagger UI or Swagger UI2, and also OpenAPI, and also the Postman test. So I already have it, this application. Now we will see the Postman test I'm running here. So every test is properly handled, or its application is running with only the simple. So I see the application is running, and we can all the possibility. We can check all the Postman test, how it is run. We'll do together the deployment process one by one. How we deploy the external jar files, do the test with the Postman, and also test with the Swagger UI. That's how we'll do together after the one by one process. So how can you build the jar files? How can you configure those files into the your local file systems? Then we see, and if I see your deployment process, we see I already have some deployment script is there. So standard jar-based deployment. How can you do this standard jar-based out of your release version, the jar release versions, and then we have also the deployment process with the Docker Compose base. How can you deploy these things? And with the help of your the Docker Compose tools and Docker files configuration, and also I have the deployment process with the Kubernetes, and then Kubernetes based deployments with your respective generated version of the jar files, standard jar files. That means you need to create the jar file, you need to run the jar file, you need to configure the jar files. This is the main idea. So go back to presentation. That we will finish the presentation, then we'll move the development. So you see, I already made a screenshot. So the first deployment process will be the standard jar-based deployment. So you saw the three deployment process, the file structure, the directory structure in the external configuration. The first one is the jar-based deployment, and the second one the Docker compose based deployment, and the third one is the Docker and Kubernetes based deployment. So let's have a start the deployment process, how it is be done, and then how it is be handled for the different approach, and how can you build these things, and how can you configure this together. So let's have a check on how it is works.